On this last video, so we're going to look at some sampling mistakes. So in the first video, we just did some basics. The second video, we looked at different sampling methods. Those are all good methods that you could do. So when those methods are done properly, typically that will result in a good sample. So now we're going to look at some mistakes and ways to get bad samples, and also different forms of bias that we might run into if we do these improper sampling methods. So the first one is a very common one, and this is a voluntary response sample. So you open the survey to many, only few respond. And the very typical one, everyone has seen these, but the very typical one that we could use, or as an example, is the restaurant survey. So you go to either the restaurant, you get your check at the end of the meal, and then at the bottom under the total, it says, go to this website and fill out the survey and let us know how we did, that kind of thing. So that's a voluntary response sample. And so in this case, the sampling frame does not correspond to the population, because who is going to go do these? Probably if you're like me, you do not go and do those restaurant surveys because they just kind of seem like a waste of time. You don't get any benefit out of them. They promise you maybe you could win a whatever gift, free dessert with your next meal or whatever. But most people don't do them, and the reason is you're only going to go do them if you have some opinion to share. So either good or bad. Usually it's bad. So those are typically not a good way to get an idea of what the population is thinking about your restaurant or whatever it is. Anytime people have to voluntarily go to do the survey, that's usually not a good way to do it. Next one is called sampling conveniently, sampling your friends, surveying people at shopping malls to find out how much people like shopping. Convenient sampling is always biased, more likely to get people like you. You're only going to ask safe-looking people, meaning people you think are going to respond positively. You're not going to. So if you're at a mall trying to stop people to fill out some survey, you're not going to get the person who looks angry or is talking on their phone. So it's not going to be a random sampling. So that's typically not a good way to go either. Use a bad sampling frame. So with this, and kind of the one in the last example with the convenience is a little bit of a bad sampling frame. So you go to the mall to find out people's opinions on shopping. So, or another example I like to use is you go to the Braves game and you're going to ask people what their favorite sport to watch is. And, obviously not everyone's going to say baseball, but most people at a baseball game will probably say baseball, because you usually go to watch your favorite sport. You usually don't go to watch just any sport. So that's an example. Or, going to some university and saying, do you think that higher education is important? Like, that's not going to be a good sampling frame. Under coverage, so bias can result when a subpopulation is left out or underrepresented. Evening phone surveys miss restaurant employees, door-to-door surveys miss people who are rarely at home. So things like that. So you're kind of conducting your survey in a way that leaves some population out. And then kind of related to that, non-response bias. So this is where a lot of people who could respond do not respond. And so that kind of goes with voluntary response also. So with that, a lot of people are not going to respond. Consider whether non-respondents are likely to think differently from responders. It's difficult to measure, since you cannot reach the non-respondents. And then response bias. This is any kind of question in your survey or something in the survey that can bias the results. So people, don't want to admit illegal behavior. Wording of the question can steer the response. So you can see that a lot in news interviews. where the person being interviewed is on the different side from the interviewer, that kind of thing. So they're gonna a lot of times they'll ask questions in kind of a unfair way, I guess you could say, and so things like that lead to response bias. So so those are just some different types of bias and different sampling methods, and you can kind of pair them together a lot of times. Some of them are just bad sampling methods, and others are talking about typical bias that results from that. Um, so in the next chapter, we're going to look at experiments, and once we get the data, what can we do with it? So email me if you have any questions.